Alright, hello everybody, this is Chase here, and today I'm on my first tutorial video. I'm going to be taking you through some of the basic workflow I do on some of my images. You can see here we have a photo of a Bixby Bridge. I took this last summer down in Big Sur, California, and we're going to be processing it today in Adobe RAW and then in Adobe Photoshop, only a little bit though. We'll only be doing some of the basic techniques I do. And then on some of the later videos we'll go into more advanced techniques such as luminosity masks, blend modes, layering, and stuff like that. So stay tuned and we'll get through all these photos. So as you can see, this photo here looks pretty good, but it's a little flat and there's not too much color. So we're going to be changing into something that looks about like this. See, there's a little more color, your eyes a bit more drawn to the bridge, a little bit more just dramatic, and we're just going to do this in a few simple steps over the course of about the next half hour or so. So let's get right into it. So what we're going to do is you're going to open up your photo into Adobe Photoshop. I'm using CS6. If you have a later version like CS5 or CS4, that's totally fine. It will be about the same. But you can see when you open up in RAW, and that actually brings me to my first point. If you're not shooting in RAW, you're definitely going to want to be. If you're not trying to do any post-processing, shooting in JPEG is generally fine, but if you really want to do any sort of post-processing, you're definitely going to want to shoot in RAW because the files aren't compressed, and it gives you a ton more leeway when you bring your photo back to your computer later after you take it. So you can see here, it opened up in RAW. This is not actually the Photoshop palette. It's back here in the background. Just looks like it's not loading all the way, but this is Adobe RAW. It'll open up when you have a RAW image. So what I usually start by doing is I go over here to the right, and there are all these little tabs, and I click this one, the sixth one that's called Lens Corrections. So I click that, and you get three little tabs, Profile, Color, Manual. So what I usually do first is I always click this checkbox, and what that does, you can see, is it gets rid of the distortion in the image, and also gets rid of a lot of that vignetting. So usually I don't like to get rid of all of it, so I'll probably bring the sliders down here, back down a bit, probably about to 80, and then this one down, maybe the vignetting down to 70 to bring back a little bit. I kind of like some of the darker corners in the image and a little bit of that fisheye look. And then you have to go over to color, the next tab, and I always click this because what this does, over here you see these green mountains and the blue ocean here in the sky, is when you start editing the image, what it will do is it will create basically like a green pixel band that's in between this the sky and the mountains, and it looks really ugly. It's pretty noticeable a lot of time, and it's almost near impossible to get rid of in Photoshop. It's a really tedious task, so just get it out of the way now. Adobe RAW will take care of it for you and makes it simple. Alright, so now we're going to go over here to our left tab, the basic tab, and you can see we have all these sorts of adjustments. So the first ones you see are your white balance adjustments, temperature and tint, and this was a sunset shot. So I'm going to pull this bar a little bit more to the right just to get more of that yellow glowy look in here. So you can see if I pull it all the way to the left, it gets a lot more yellow. But I'm just going to leave it about 6400. I think that looks pretty good. And I'll actually pull the tint down here at about -4 to bring out a little more of these greens down here. So not too big adjustments, just a little bit, because we'll make a lot more adjustments as we go along. The next one down you see is exposure. Now if you look up here in your histogram, you can see my histogram is a bit to the left. It's a bit skewed to the left, and what that means is my image is a bit tad underexposed. So if you watch that histogram, when I pull up the exposure, that histogram is going to move to the right and become more centered. That means I'm more properly exposed. So for this image, I'm going to go to about +30. I think that looks pretty good. With the histogram, you don't always have to try to make it right in the middle. It's with photography, it's really all with your taste. So if you like it a bit darker, leave it that way. Contrast, I'm going to pull contrast up to about +35, and you can see that's making my darks darker, my lights lighter, so making it a bit more dramatic. Highlights and shadows, if you're using an earlier version of Photoshop, these will be called recovery and something else I can't quite remember, but they are pretty much the exact same thing as highlights and shadows. So with highlights, this deals with the bright spots of your image. So if I pull highlights down, if you look at the bridge, it'll make that a lot darker, not as overblown. Well, if I pulled it up, it would make it way overblown. So I'm going to pull highlights down to about -18, somewhere in that range, to lessen the overexposure on the bridge. And the shadows, this will work in the dark zones. If you pay attention to the bushes and this dark part of the bridge, that'll bring those kind of back. So See, if I crank it all the way, you can see it brings it back a lot. Kind of looks unnatural though, so I'm only going to pull this to maybe about plus 30 or so. Looks pretty good. And then whites and blacks, this is a more refined way to really mess with contrast. So what I usually do, just to get a little bit more, I pull the whites up just a bit, and I usually pull the blacks down. There are some times where I may go more extreme or maybe the opposite depending on the image, but for here I'm just going to do little adjustments like that. And the last three tools are Clarity, Vibrance, and Saturation. Clarity is a really cool tool. What it does is when you pull it to the right, well, basically what it does is it's editing the midtones of your image. So contrast basically does the extreme parts of your image, like the highlights and shadows, while Clarity really just does the midtones. So you can see when I pull this up all the way, it kind of makes it look grainy, but it adds a lot of definition to what I was talking about, those midtones. So I'm going to pull this to about plus 35, and I think that makes it look a lot better. Well, if, for example, if I went the other way on Clarity, see it creates that fuzzy dream glow effect. You know, a lot of times you may use this for portrait shots, or if you're doing waterfall and want to make things look, you know, a bit more dreamy or magical, you'll pull it to left. But for this example, we're just going to pull it to about plus 35 for now. Looks pretty good. And then for Vibrance, Saturation, I always crank up the Vibrance more than Saturation. That's because Vibrance always affects the more muted colors of the image, while Saturation does everything. And Saturation kind of makes it look a bit more natural, adds a lot more noise. So I'm going to pull Vibrance up to about plus 32. Looks pretty good. I'm only going to do Saturation to about plus 7 or 6, somewhere around there. So definitely looking a lot better than what we started with. If you go up here to this little checkbox, this is Preview. If you click it, it'll actually show you what you came in with. And here's what we have right now. So definitely looking a lot better, a lot more dynamic. So on the next tab, you can see Curves. I usually do curves as a separate layer in Photoshop. We'll get to that in probably a later video. So I usually skip over that. You can do curves here, but you don't have to. Next thing I do is I usually go to Sharpening. And this first tool, Mount, when you get to the Sharpening here, your image is actually a little less sharpened than it was even when you took it. So what I'm doing now when I pull it to 50 is I'm not actually sharpening it fully. I'm just taking it back to its original state. So I will go in later in Photoshop and I will sharpen even more to get a basically, you know, more crisp image. But for now, I'm just going to pull it back to revert it back to its original state. I'll leave the rest alone for now, and I go down to Luminance, which is noise reduction, and I'll pull that up to about 10. And I'm really doing that just because of the sky. You know, sky, like these kind of clouds where they're a bit fuzzy, don't have a lot of, you know, defined details like the bridge or the grass, and get a bit more noise. So I'll pull that up just to get rid of some of that noise for now. The next tab, it's the Hsl Grayscale Tab, and this affects color. You can see you have hue, saturation, luminance. So, you know, for hue, let's say I want to pull these oranges. These will only affect the oranges in the image. So if you watch, if I crank it all the way down, every orange color in the image will be affected, and no other color will be. So I'm going to pull the oranges down just about -10 as well, just to get those a little more red, separate those colors, maybe just a bit more, but you know, separate the colors a lot more from the whole image because I like a wide range of color in my images. I'll leave the rest alone. You know, I'll go to saturation. I'll bump up the oranges a bit. I'll bump up the yellow even more because I really want this image to have a really sunset look. You know, I'll pull the greens up a bit too, and maybe some of the blues too for the ocean and part of that sky. Make those look a little nicer as well. Really make those stand out. It's cool, looking pretty good. The Luminance Tool. This again is for specific colors, but this measures how bright or dark they are. So for example, again, using the orange, if I pull it down all the way, it's going to make those oranges really dark. Well, if I put it all the way, it's going to basically overblow them. So I'm going to just probably push the oranges down just a little bit, make those a little darker, and I'll leave the rest as it is. I think it looks pretty good. So that's about all I do with these tabs. You know, there are a lot more functions in these tabs you can go through, play with, or really exciting. If you have any questions about them, feel free to ask me in the comments below. The only other two tools I really recommend using in Adobe RAW are these two up here, the Graduated Filter and Adjustment Brush. Graduated Filter, for those that don't know, it's a filter you use when you're actually out in the field, and it's usually in the shape of a square, and half is dark, and then it gradually becomes clear on the bottom half. So that's because if you're trying to expose for foreground, but your sky is a different, like many f-stops away, your camera can't pick up that dynamic range like your eye can. If you put this filter in front, expose your ground, and then your sky would basically be the same exposure. So basically that's what we're doing here. Everything here in this image, I was using a graduated filter when I took this image, but I want the sky here to be a bit more darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down this graduated filter, and I'm going to pull it down at an angle to affect the sky. Now see, if I pull it down all the way, what will happen? See, I have my exposure all the way cranked down. Don't worry about the settings, by the way, over here. We'll adjust those with the filter. But as you can see, the effect goes halfway through where I pulled it down. So if, for example, let me see if I can crank this back up here. If I only pull this down here, what it will do is it'll only affect the sky. See, now the adjustment is only coming up to basically above the mountains and whatnot. So I'm going to tilt this just a bit more, just make sure it's getting those clouds above the mountain. And alright, so that looks pretty good. So now we'll actually do the real settings. So I'll pull it down to maybe about -40. Make sky a little darker, a little more dramatic. And you know what? Now I'll leave the contrast, highlights, and everything else where it is. I think it looks pretty good. You can obviously go through and mess with it when you're doing your own image as well. But the graduated filter is a really, really helpful tool in Adobe Photoshop, in RAW. And what we'll do is, you see we're in Edit, and that's because we're in this graduated filter. So if I press New, I can use another graduated filter. So you can see if you always just click this one, you can always just go back, make edits to it again. You can delete it just by pressing the delete button. But we'll create a new one, and I want to brighten up this foreground just a bit more. So I'm going to pull a new graduated filter up over here to this bridge, and I'm going to pull the exposure now, positive side. So I'm going to pull it up to about plus 55, 50-ish. That looks pretty good. And again, I'll leave everything else where it is. I want the highlights just a bit more up to bring out some of that shine on the grass that's coming from the sun. And that looks pretty good. I like it. Ooh, I think I'll make the temperature just a bit warmer here and the tint a little more down. But alright, so that looks pretty nice. And the last thing is this adjustment brush. So this is basically the same. It does similar effects as the graduate filter. But what's nice is you can paint where you want the effect to be instead. So instead of being like a filter where it just creates a band, you can just paint wherever you like and add as many brushes as you want. So for example, let's make these mountains a little brighter again since they got trapped in the filter. So I can go down here just to decrease my size of my brush. You usually want a high feather because that diffuses the effect that you're painting on away from the circle, so it looks a lot more natural. So we'll paint over here on this dark part of the mountain, and as you can see when I paint over it, if I pull up the brightness all the way, you can see it's only affecting where that brush was. So we're going to pull that down to make it look normal again, probably about plus 55. It looks kind of like the rest of the mountain there. Everything else, again, I'm just going to keep leaving it for the sake of this tutorial. It looks pretty good, but I think you get the point that you can really keep painting on adjustment brushes and graduate filters by pressing New. So I could, if I was really taking a long time to do this photo, I'd go back and I'd make a brush just for the bridge, for the water, for all sorts of stuff, and I'd really go through and get every area the way I like it. And again, this is only RAW, so we haven't even gotten into Photoshop yet. But that's basically what I do in RAW, and those are pretty much all my steps that I always take. A lot of people always try to crop or straighten their image right away. I suggest not to do this because I don't think you actually even can undo it if you crop it in RAW, which is kind of annoying. So that's why I usually wait. I just do my photo the way it looks. I upload it in Photoshop, and then I will crop it, straighten however I like in Photoshop, because it's a lot easier to go back and forth between crops and Photoshop than is in RAW. But for right now, here's our image. It's looking really nice, and we're going to open up in Photoshop. And this is probably going to take a while on my computer, so I'll let it load, and I'll come right back to you guys when it's open. Alright, welcome back, everybody. It took a while to open on my computer because I'm working on my laptop right now, so editing photos is definitely a bit slower than if I was using a desktop or whatnot. So if you're following along this video and or using like a bamboo tablet or something like that, or anything else is going to make editing your photos a lot easier because I'm using a trackpad. But anyway, so we'll continue on. So here's our Photoshop that we opened up from Adobe RAW. So now usually what I do for my first steps, and again we're only going to cover the basics today. So we'll just do a few things on Photoshop and we'll finish this image up for now. So what I usually start by doing is, you can see here we have our one layer background. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer, and to do that you can come down here. You see that you have this little page. It looks like a little page with a fold in it. So what you do is you click Alt and you click it. When you do, it comes up with this menu. So I'm going to label this, let's just name it New, and I'm going to change the mode, and these are blend modes, which I'm talking about. They're very, very useful. They can do a whole lot of cool features to the photo, and they're set up in different groups. Like for example, this one, overlay to hard mix, these all involve contrast. And one of the most used ones here is soft light. This is absolutely my favorite. I think it does the best things to my photo. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to create a new layer that has this soft light blend mode. You can see here. So you can always change the blend mode by clicking this. Now, as you can see, it's actually empty. There's nothing in it. There hasn't been anything done to it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill that with that soft light effect. Now how we do that is we're going to fill it with that. So if you come over here, you can see we have these two squares. One's black, one's white. The black one is in front of the white one. Well, to fill it with the soft light, we're going to want the black one to be in the back for this. So we're going to press X, and that's going to switch it, so it's going to push the black in the back. And then to fill this, all we're going to have to do is press Command, or if you're using PC, it should be Control Delete. So we're going to press on the Mac, Command Delete, and it will fill this with black, which puts the soft light effect into the photo. Now, that's a little bit too much. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower the opacity, which will basically make that bottom layer, the background layer, more transparent. So if you watch, when I pull down this opacity, it's going to slightly get rid of more of that. It's going to make more and more of that soft light effect invisible. And we're going to pull that all the way down to about 20. Now I know it seems a little low, but when you here, if we get rid of the eye, you can see the effect that soft light's having on the photo. You could probably maybe add a little bit more. I'll actually bring it up maybe just around 24 or so, but it definitely looks a lot better. Just really adds a lot of dynamic drama to the photo. It makes it look a lot better. So we're going to leave that as it is. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer, and we're also going to introduce some of these things over here that are called the adjustment layers. Now if you were just, for example, editing on your background layer, you could edit everything on the background layer. You wouldn't even have to create another layer. But the only problem is Photoshop will only let you go back so many mistakes. So if you get into your photo and you're editing and you're 100 steps in and you realize that maybe your 10th or 20th step was a mistake and you want to redo it, well, you're kind of out of luck. You can't. So by creating new layers, you can actually just go back and be like, oh, I don't like this layer anymore. I'm just going to delete it. So that's the beauty of layers. So for example, if I was just not using layers, I could just go up to Image and go to Adjustments and keep using all these here. And all of these adjustments here are the same ones you can find over here. But the difference is, again, these will just build upon one layer, but these over here will add a new layer. And not to mention a layer mask, which you'll see in a second. So for this one, let's try the photo filter effect for today. So when it comes up, it's select on a warming filter. I'm going to choose warming filter LBA. I just kind of like the LBA one a little bit better. And I'm going to bring that density down just about maybe 18% or so. So now you can see I'm going to actually push this on top. You usually want the new layers on top, just kind of keep building upon the last one. You can see if I get rid of the eye, it's not as warm here as it is here. But the only thing is, what I'll show you with this layer mask is, I don't really like the blue sky and the blue ocean kind of losing some of that blue hue that really makes a lot of the color shine through. So that's this beauty of the layer mask. So you have this white layer mask over here that's created, and what we're going to do is we're going to paint over it with black. And what that will basically do is black reveals, white conceals. And that's an easy kind of way to remember is now when you paint over black, you'll see that everything under here will show through. So we're going to bring back that blueness by getting rid of the warming filter effect. So you can see here our black's in front, which is what we want. We want it selected this time. And we also have already conveniently our brush tool selected. If you don't, it's easy command, just press B or just press brush over here. And one neat feature I want to show you about the brush, it saves so much time, is a lot of people will go up here and they'll click this and they'll change their brush size by typing in and pulling this bar, and they'll change the hardness this way too. One really neat trick you want to use is on a Mac, if you press and hold the Control and Alt key and then click down the left mouse or your clicking mouse, hold those down, it'll pop up like this, and if you slide your finger or mouse to the left or right, it'll change the diameter of the brush, and if you push your mouse or trackpad up and down, it'll change the hardness. So you can see if I pull all the way down the hardness, it's really filling up that circle. It'll make really fine lines, but that's why you usually want a hardness. I only usually use a hardness for around 0 to 15. Again, like what we were doing in Adobe RAW, it makes that kind of gives it that fuse look. So definitely a lot easier to just change your brush size really quick. Again, that's Control Alt together, and you have your click on your mouse. You have to hold all those down, then you can scroll. I don't know exactly again what the command is on PC, but I will find out and post it in the information below. So look for that. So now again, you can see our opacity is 100%, which is good. So that means 100% of the warming effect will go away. If you only want a little bit to go away, you could do maybe 40% or 50 or whatnot. So we're going to paint over the sky to bring back that blueness we had. So you can see that blue coming back through. See right there over the ocean, a lot of blue. We'll paint through here, bring that all back. So we're looking pretty good. Let's make it a bit bigger just to go through it. There we are. Alright, so now we got our blue ocean back. So you can see over here on this little layer mask, all the black shows where you painted over. So if I get rid of the eye, you can see the foreground will change, but the sky won't, and that's because there's no effect in the sky anymore. So only the foreground's changing because that's where the warming filter is. So definitely looking a lot better. Now we have a lot of wide range of color. You can keep adding photo filter upon photo filter. You can add different colors with adjustments. So a lot of times I'll have 10 color balance layers here, just because I'll go and I'll work on maybe just the bridge, and I'll mask out everything else, and I'll just work on the sky. So you can spend a lot of times layering stuff like that. And again, that's just an introduction. We'll go way into more detail in a later video. So now what I usually like to do is, because a lot of times I think these layers get a little sloppy. This is my personal preference. You obviously don't have to do this. What I usually like to do is I go to this button over here, and I'll click it, and I'll go to Flatten Image. And the reason I'll do this is because I don't like a lot of my layers getting stacked on top of each other. It kind of makes it a hassle sometimes, and I usually feel confident enough 99% of the time that I won't need to go back and change something I did. I can just usually maybe change it again or something. So I like to bring it all back into one layer. So now all three of those layers we just had are now merged back into one. So that makes life a little bit easier. So we're going to do two more things today. We're going to add some dodge and burn layer, and then we're going to sharpen it again, and the image will be finished. So now to dodge and burn, what I'll do is I'll just create, not this time a new layer, but I'll create a duplicate layer. So by doing that, I can go up here to layer, and I'll click duplicate layer. You can also make a new layer too, by the way. But I'll click duplicate layer, and that's going to create a, let's call this dodge and burn, and this will create a copy or duplicate of this background layer. So now basically what I want to do is I'm just going to add dodge and burn. Oh, and for some of you, you might be asking why I just created a duplicate layer, and that's just because, again, now this layer will just be for the dodge and burn. So if I did want to delete it or see the effects it has, I can just click the eye and get rid of it. So definitely makes life a little bit easier. So I'm right on the dodge tool over here, and go over here, you have your dodge and burn tools. Dodge basically brightens or lightens spots in the image that you paint over, and burn darkens them. So it's kind of easy way of, it's kind of like what they did in the dark rooms way back in the day when, dodging and burning in the tubs. So my exposure for my dodge is only 20%. Let's see if I went up to 100%, you can see the effect is pretty drastic. But at 20%, it's a little more subtle, so you can paint over a few times. It is an additive effect. So if you paint and then let go and then paint again, it will go from 20 to 40%. Simple, right? So I'll paint over these brushes a bit, just to bring them out. I want these to be a bit brighter. Maybe paint over parts of this bridge, just bring that out a bit more. Maybe just give the whole bridge a little brightness, just so your eye really is drawn to it. And there goes my computer acting slow again. Then I'll come to the burn tool, and just for example, it's got 10%. I'll paint over the skies just a bit, make those just a bit darker. Stuff like that makes it a bit more stormy looking. But you get the point. You can dodge or burn a lot. It's really fun to work with. So alright, it's looking really good. Now the last thing we're going to do is, again, just makes it simple. I think it makes it simple. I'm sure there are a lot of ways you can do it, but for sharpening, I'll just create a duplicate layer again. So it's the exact same thing. It's basically just duplicating all these kind of. And now we're going to sharpen it. So the way to sharpen, I know we already sharpened it in RAW, but now this is going to be the final sharpening effect to really make sure the image is crisp and clear. We're going to go up to here to filter, and we're going to go down to sharpen and unsharp mask. And you may have noticed too it says unsharp mask here, but that's because it was last time we used it, but usually it won't be like that. We'll go down here to unsharp mask and click it. And you can see when unsharp mask opens up, well, if it ever does on my computer at least, well, we're going to get 3 tabs. Here we go. You're going to get amount, radius, and threshold. So what amount does is when you sharpen an image, Photoshop takes the edge between 2 colors and makes the light pixels lighter and the dark pixels darker. So basically amount determines how light the lighter pixels get and how dark the darker pixels get. So if you set the amount too high, your picture is going to look grainy and overly contrasty, and you're actually going to lose a lot of that detail. So I find with landscape a really good fine line is these settings right here, 100, 1.5 to 4, but I'll usually always have the amount between 70 and maybe most 120 or so. There was one time I had it 200, but it's very, very rare. You just don't find it. You know, you can see kind of what it does by scrolling here. You see the effects. So I'll just pull this to about 100. What radius does is radius determines the area that will be sharpened. So a low radius means only the pixels right next to the edge will be sharpened, and a high radius means a wider area will be sharpened. So right now I only want 1.5 radius. I found that's pretty much my go-to number for radius. Makes it simple. Always turns out to be a good result, especially for landscape. I might change it a bit for wildlife, but for landscape images it's really good. And then threshold determines how much contrast there needs to be between colors for them to be sharpened. So a higher threshold means higher contrast areas will be sharpened, but low contrast areas will not. So sharpening low contrast areas makes them look rough and speckly. So setting the threshold too low will give you a grainy look on low contrast areas and will make noise stand out. It's not so good. So again, if you didn't really follow any of that, I would just always suggest to use these settings. They really do work the best. I can about guarantee it. So I'm going to click OK, and it's going to sharpen that image for me as long as it takes. So cool, now it's sharpened. I know it's hard to tell maybe from you looking on YouTube too, but I could see when it's sharpened it made some definition of the rocks look stand out a little bit more, especially in the bridge and some of these bushes. But you know, everything looks pretty good. And the last thing we're going to do is what I usually do is we're going to create a layer mask again, like we were for the adjustment layers on the last time. And that's because we're going to want to get rid of the sharpening effect in the cloud, because when you sharpen things like clouds and one of those very defined features, what I was talking about earlier, it creates noise. So I'm going to want to get rid of that. So I create a layer mask by pressing this button, the white rectangle with the black circle in the middle. You see it creates that layer mask here. And I'm going to press B for my brush tool again. Have it at 100%, and the black is in front. So I'm painting with black. And again, I'm just going to paint over the clouds. So I'm just going to paint over these guys, make sure they're all under there. Maybe just paint over this top layer of ocean. And there you go, you see the black is painted over here. And that's it. So now, again, it's probably hard to tell from at home, but now the clouds are not sharpened, but the rest of the image is. And just so you guys know too, the dodge and burn that we did earlier didn't go away because we're painting it in this layer. So the dodge and burn effects that we had on the clouds earlier will still be there. All we did was get rid of the sharpening mask because that's all we did on this layer. And for basic workflow, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed my first video and tutorial. I hope it helps. If you have any questions, just feel free to message me through Facebook, my website, or just write comments down below. I'll be happy to help. Any videos you guys want to see, just let me know. I will make them in the future. But in some later videos, we'll go stuff anywhere from how to make star trails to luminosity masks, which can really make that sunset image or look a lot better, and all sorts of wildlife stuff too. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed, and happy shooting.